Thank you, and welcome to another episode of Ask Neurowork. So, myself, Rachel Worsley, founder of Neurodiversity Media, and Kate Hardiman, founder of Unified 360, are here today to discuss the main issue, well, the main question of this podcast episode, which is my neurodivergent employee has performance issues. What should I do? Basically, from a manager's perspective. So, this is a question that has cropped up quite often, I suppose, for us. And it's also cropped up during recent discussions during Neurodiversity Celebration Week, which I thought was very interesting. So lots of managers suspect that their colleague could be neurodivergent. They might be struggling with performance, but they don't really know what to do about it without feeling like they're discriminating against their neurodivergence if they suspect it's causing. But I'm probably preempting the question a little bit because I'm going to throw it over to Kate Hardiman to start us off in terms of how would you go about answering this question, Kate?
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I've been asked this question a few times now by clients when I've been facilitating workshops. So it's a great question for our podcast episode today. My first response is always that when it comes to addressing performance issues with a neurodivergent person, it's really important to do it thoughtfully and take an individualized approach. So I've put together my top 8 things for managers to remember in the process of performance management when it comes to people with neurodivergence. So, number one is about assessment and support. So, before tackling the actual performance issues, it's important to see if you can identify the root cause of the performance issues. You can't assume that there aren't factors at play with this person that you aren't aware of that could be impacting their performance. We all deal with major life events from time to time. And when something significant like that happens, it often impacts your performance at work. I know I've been in that situation a lot of times when I've had things happen, someone's passed away that I'm close to, or I'm having a relationship issue or anything. It's really difficult for that not to impact your performance. So if you don't know what's going on for the person, consider looking into that a little bit more sensitively, because it can impact their performance at work and the way that they are outside of work as well. Second is open dialogue. So once you've checked in with the person and you've been sensitive, but you've inquired about what might be going on for them, you're ready to have a conversation with them. I don't mean a formal performance review meeting, because that could be quite triggering for someone with neurodivergence. So I'd suggest a more casual, low-key, supportive approach, like a chat over a coffee is how you might position it. So the goal with that is to understand their perspective, let them talk about any challenges they're experiencing and how they feel they can best contribute to the team. Remember, it's about opening up the lines of communication and not laying down judgments. So actively listen to their perspective, acknowledge their strengths and challenges, encourage them to share any specific difficulties they might be having in their role. And the most important thing to get is their input as to what they think you can do to support them to perform better. 3 is based on the feedback you get when you look at adjustments and accommodations. So work with them to identify accommodations and adjustments that can support their performance. Things like flexible work arrangements or modifying tasks and deadlines to suit them better, giving them access to assistive technology. For example, there's software out there that can help people read documents more effectively. I think one's called Read and Write, which is really helpful for people with dyslexia because it converts text to speech. So you can look at tweaking the way that you communicate with them. For example, many NDers find verbal communication more difficult. So you might find things improve if you use written communication with them more often. The 4th tip is training and development. So if you find from your discussions with them and from just observing their performance in general that they have a particular skills gap. You can offer targeted training and development opportunities to help address the gaps. So send them on a course to help improve on their weaknesses. The fifth tip is monitor progress and provide feedback. So regularly check in with them about how they're going, and give them really gentle and constructive feedback. And I say gentle because the majority of people with ADHD can experience something called rejection sensitive dysphoria, or RSD for short. And it's where they have an extreme emotional response to a perceived rejection or criticism. And what it does is it can cause that person to have feelings of distress, shame, and anxiety, and extreme sadness or even anger when they feel they're being criticized or rejected, regardless of whether the rejection or criticism is real or imagined. They're going to potentially take on perceived negative feedback in a different way to neurotypicals. So the challenge for managers is how to deliver the message, but do it in the most compassionate way. So in terms of giving feedback, first, it's a good idea to ask them how they want to receive the feedback in the first place, because look, that can take away some of the anxiety and the stress that might trigger the RSD. And yes, of course, you need to mention the issues. So be direct, because vague comments can be misinterpreted, and always give specific examples of the performance issues. But don't dwell on them. Don't dwell on the shortcomings, for too long, and just get on with emphasizing their strengths and areas for improvement. As a rule, always frame feedback in a way that focuses on growth and development. Number 6 is seek expert advice. If you're still not sure how to handle it, there are external consultants with expertise in diversity and workplace accommodations who can help you. That's one of the things Unify 360 does. They can give you valuable insights and recommendations that are tailored to the needs of the specific employee. Number 7, legal compliance. Just be aware that under the Disability Discrimination Act, you have a legal duty of care to make reasonable adjustments to support employees' needs and prevent discrimination. And the last tip is continuous improvement. You should be looking, periodically at reviewing and refining your policies and your practices and initiatives related to neurodiversity inclusion in the workplace. Get feedback from employees and your stakeholders about how they think that you can create a more supportive and inclusive work environment for everyone. All of these things that I've just talked through should provide you with a really good foundation for managing performance management challenges when it comes to neurodivergent team members.
Fantastic, Kate. Thank you for that. I guess I'll like to add a couple of personal stories about 2 differing approaches of performance management I've received in the past. And I guess it's interesting, I suppose, because most people are not, I guess, being neurodivergent, I suppose we're not willing to talk about such instances, but we're like all employees, I suppose, some of us, have our performance scrutinized, and sometimes that could be pleasant and sometimes could be unpleasant, and we should really talk about those experiences rather than hide behind them. So one experience I had was I struggled with sort of attention to detail on certain editing things. So I was editing a bunch of articles, and I was missing a few things because at that time I was only just recently diagnosed with ADHD, and my medication hadn't really kicked in yet. So I was sort of making quite a few mistakes. Even though I was passionate about the work and all that, it was sort of picked up by my manager. And it wasn't handled very well, I suppose. It was sort of like a couple of meetings with them where they sort of pointed it out, and then eventually they let me go. But I chose to resign first rather than let that happen. And
Yeah.
so that was a very tricky situation. While recently I had a more positive sort of performance management sort of thing where I was, sort of struggling to find motivation at work because, as it turned out, even though I liked the idea of working remotely from home, I was actually much more productive in the office. And I hadn't really realized that until very recently because of the body doubling effect. So the idea that you sort of buddy up with someone to help you through it. But what I actually discovered through reflection and through my discussions with my manager, I guess that performance management review process was less about putting me on a performance management plan because they said, we don't want to, you're actually a really good employee and you're doing some really great work and stuff. It's just that we've just noticed that you haven't been motivated recently to do certain types of work very well. And and they said, is what sort of suggestions do you have to, improve your performance? And then that actually forced me to kind of take a step back and go, actually, maybe I haven't been as productive at home as I wanted to, and perhaps maybe I should go to the office one extra day a week to help mitigate some of the challenges of working from home. So interestingly, this is why neurodivergent people are just people with a variety of experiences. We don't all, work from home and be productive about it. I'm probably the opposite. I'm probably someone who might work better in the office when there's a body doubling effect where I'm sitting next to someone doing that work. But once I had that conversation with my manager, when it didn't feel like a performance management review, it actually felt like a really good conversation with them about actually what are the things that I can put into place. Like I was empowered to come up with the suggestions myself to help improve my performance. And so, after that, I didn't have any, meetings to kind of go over my performance again. It was much better. I had some more positive feedback from my manager saying, you're so much more motivated now. You seem like you're doing work really at a higher standard. And so that was a really positive outcome because the workplace didn't try and impose a formal performance management plan. They kind of, as you mentioned, Kate, like opened the lines of communication and just engaged in an adult dialogue
Yeah.
with each other to kind of get to the bottom of the solution. So I guess even though I must admit it is a little uncomfortable to talk about these issues, I think it's important to kind of talk about it in terms of, it happens to everyone, but it's about how you deal with it in a mature way rather than necessarily escalate into blaming their neurodivergence and, basically saying, let you go, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's sort of my contribution to the topic. I don't know if you've had any comments about that, Kate.
Oh, just again, it's great to hear your lived experience with that, and what you're highlighting is just really common sense, isn't it? As an approach, it's just let's have a conversation about it. Let's not make this confrontational. Let's make it about how we can best work together. How can management support you to work better? And what have you noticed about your performance? And how can you come to the table with some solutions that the business can implement that are going to be meaningful to you? So my final comment is just really that dealing with performance issues with neurodivergent employees is about focusing less on the actual issues. Yes, you have to be specific, but just don't get bogged down in that for too long. It's more about helping them understand how they can do their best work. Managers will need to show a bit of patience and understanding in this process, but in the long run, it's going to give the manager, the organisation, and the person being managed the best outcomes, I think.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kate. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Rachel.